You're listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. You can hear the show live Monday through Friday from 9 to 11 on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN and streaming at accesswdun.com. You can find all things Martha Zoller at marthazoller.com. We're going to talk with former Senator Kelly Loeffler, who is the creator and just idea maker behind Greater Georgia, who's done such great work throughout the state, getting people out to vote, engaging with groups of people who typically have not heard conservative ideas, and spreading this message of why our ideas work better. No one's done it better than her, and no one understands business better than Kelly Loeffler does. And she's joining me right now, and thank you so much, Kelly, for giving me some time today.
Good morning, Martha. Great to be with y'all.
Thank you. So let's talk first of all, just kind of about a couple of things related to the federal government. We've got the debt ceiling talks, which looks like they're going to happen now. I mean, the Republicans did what nobody thought they could do, and a lot of Republicans thought they couldn't do it. They wove together a majority on the House side. The president and Leader Schumer kept saying, show us your plan, show us your plan. They didn't think that McCarthy could put a plan together that he wouldn't lose 5 votes and couldn't get passed. Well, he was able to put a plan together. It may not be a perfect plan, but he was able to keep his caucus together, and now the Democrats are scrambling and say they're going to come to the table.
Well, you point out something that is really amazing, considering that it took 15 tries for Speaker McCarthy to become Speaker. He put together this plan in record time to save $4.5 trillion of taxpayer dollars over 10 years in the Limit, Save, and Grow Act, Martha. And Biden won't take the win. He got the debt ceiling increase, but now he's trying to provoke a crisis. Okay? And he is on record in the past of saying we can't have brinksmanship, and now he won't meet with McCarthy. So he is now saying, as you know, on May 9th, he will meet. They haven't met since February, however. And keep in mind, on May 9th, Congress only has 15 days left in session until June 1, which is what's called the X date that Treasury Secretary Yellen has said that the U.S. could default on our debt. Now, we have never done it. We can never do it. This is the really one of the foundations of our country. Back in 1790, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, I mean, they all came together and said, we're going to be the best we're going to be the best debtor in the world. We're going to make this the strongest country. So we don't need to even walk up to that line. We did it 12 years ago when Obama was president, and that debt ceiling was only $14 trillion. And now we're at $31.4 trillion. That's a 125% increase in debt. We have to have reined in spending because it's out of control. I saw it firsthand when I was in Washington. We have probably upwards of $1 trillion of unspent COVID funds. Biden has tried to create a new army of IRS agents that, you know, $80 billion is allocated now, but in the next few years that will cost $200 billion. He's passed the Green New Deal tax credits that's crony capitalism at its worst and distorts the market and wastes taxpayer money. And then the student loan forgiveness. I mean, well over half the country does not have a student loan or college degree, but taxpayers are now supposed to pay for PhDs, college degrees. So we've really got to get back to the foundations of this country and not spending more than we raise. And look, the economy is slowing down. The GDP number was a surprise. The slow GDP number in the first quarter, that means job creation, job opportunity, pay is going to go down. And frankly, the Fed tomorrow is going to make sure it goes down when they raise rates again and make student loans, car loans, credit card payments more expensive. So this is a runaway train that Biden is really gambling with in the name of politics.
Well, and what this plan does, and you're right, the administration just won't take a win. We have never done what he says he wants, which is a clean debt ceiling deal. It's always been with other things when we've done this. And so what McCarthy did, and I got to tell you, I wasn't the biggest Kevin McCarthy fan, okay? But he was able to cobble this deal together, and it's pretty good. It cuts federal spending. It gets rid, as you noted, this $20,000 unfair student loan forgiveness when really only 22% of Americans, have student loans. And it's unfair for those of us that, one, didn't get, saved and sacrificed so their kids wouldn't have student loans. Two, paid back student loans. It's not fair to all those people, so it makes sense. The IRS funding is in there, the rescinding of that. Work requirements to safety net programs. We have a labor shortage right now. To require people who are able to work for the benefits they get is not a bad thing. Some of these green energy tax credits. And then the big one, as you mentioned, was the about $1 trillion worth of COVID funds that have not been spent yet. And, your former colleague, Rand Paul, which has this plan where what we ought to do is go back to 2019 spending and then build back from there. I think that's a reasonable plan, too. But this is a reasonable plan. In any other world than the bizarre world the Democrats live in right now, this would be a win.
Well, and exactly right. And look at the other implementation that they're suggesting in the act, which is unleashing U.S. energy production. That was part of H.R. 1, the House's first bill that they introduced in this legislative session. If you think about what it could save for each American family, about $800 a year in energy costs, to allow us to drill for oil, to produce natural gas, to get back to a normal situation in this country of being energy independent and hopefully energy dominant in a world of increasing risks, not just with Russia and Ukraine, but China, some of the things happening around the world that we're not even faced with but could be confronted with very soon. So I think, we'll see if that can stay in there, but I just think we're overlooking this very important aspect of the U.S. economy, which is energy. It would grow the tax base. It would grow jobs. It would bring more revenue into Treasury. It would grow GDP. And we just don't talk about it enough because I worry that this climate halt is getting normalized in this country. And this is a country that is driven by fossil fuels. We're the cleanest producer and user of fossil fuels. And we absolutely can find ways of having clean energy. But we're doing it at the cost of hardworking families.
So yesterday, Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, made this claim that illegal immigration is down 90% since President Biden took office. I think that's probably next to, if you want to keep your doctor, you can, that Obama said back in 2008. That is the biggest lie that I've ever heard from the podium of the White House of the United States of America.
Well, everyone just knows that what comes out of that podium. I mean, she is the liar in chief. She is full propaganda mode. And in this country, the immigration crisis we're having right now is not only creating the crisis that we're heading into from a fiscal policy, because now the Biden administration is giving free health care, free housing, free education, all these giveaways, and not taking care of the American people who have real needs, real challenges. And it's infuriating Americans, Georgians, people that I talk to, and they say, why is this happening? Look, I know that they want to build their electorate. This is a very dangerous way to try to build the Democrat electorate. So hopefully we will hold them accountable in 24. That's why my organization is active every single year outside an election year and in an election year to remind people of the consequences of the people that we elect to office.
You know, and I think that I'm glad you mentioned Greater Georgia, and I'm glad you mentioned 2024 because, you know, there's been a number of stories about how young people in their 20s are going back to God, that they've gone from pre-pandemic being like less than 25% of people going to church to they're in the 30s and growing. We've had huge gatherings in Ashbury, in Oklahoma, in places around. And you're seeing this sort of movement, kind of like we saw in the beginning of the 80s. I know you're too young to remember this, but in the beginning of the 80s, where you had this kind of silent majority, the people, the regular people that are out there going to work every day. I am feeling encouraged that there are some signs to say people have had enough. They've had enough of being lied to with things that they know are lies.
Well, absolutely. This secular religion that the government is trying to replace, put the loyalty to government over God, is really badly misguided. It's going off the rails. It's not serving anyone. And what's encouraging is that young people are seeing this. As you said, in the early 80s, this is the awakening that the country needs. And we have to remember, this country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, one nation under God. And we have an administration that wants to take God out of everything. You can't have a Bible in school, but the teachers' unions want to advance pornography in schools. So we really have to take a hard look at the morality and the impacts of the decisions we're having and what it's doing to this country. And we're going to continue to have these so-called culture wars because, first of all, culture is really important. Morality is important. And it really underlines the kind of not just the rule of law, but the principles in which this country was founded.
Absolutely. Kelly Loeffler, tell us what you're doing at Greater Georgia right now.
So last week, we held the first annual Greater Georgia Legislative Awards ceremony. It was a fun reception, not in a ballroom. What we wanted to do was get legislators together, honor their work. We had Governor Kemp, First Lady Marty Kemp, Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, Speaker Pro Tem, President Pro Tem, and the legislators that won awards for their hard work. Think about, so we're in 23. There's no election this year, but how do we connect voters with the results that legislators got for them this session that they elected back in November of 22? So we wanted to highlight their work on crime. For example, going after gang activity, which we know is on the rise here in Georgia. We wanted to recognize their work for holding DAs accountable, for returning $1 billion in taxpayer dollars to hardworking Georgians. And so we really are making sure that the issues are well understood by our electorate. And then we're out registering voters. You may have seen us up at Gainesville High School last weekend. Great to be with the kids there. We were at UGA registering voters. We're doing more and more with young voters, Hispanic voters. We had a great Black Leaders Roundtable. So we're just staying really active to remind people the importance of conservative values, American principles, and why they need to be engaged.
Kelly Loeffler, if people want to know more about Greater Georgia, how can they get information?
Well, just go to our website. I'd love for y'all to sign up for our newsletter, greatergeorgia.com. You can sign up to volunteer. We get kind of ramped up starting at the end of this summer. We'll be getting ready for next year's primary election and then elections, so in November of 24. So greatergeorgia.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
Kelly Loeffler, thank you so much for being with us today. Have a great rest of the week.
You too. Thanks, Martha.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Will Marshal is joining me right now, and Will is the president and founder of the Progressive Policy Institute, and he recently wrote a column for The Hill called Democrats Need a Post-Populist Economics. And wanted to have him on because we like to have full discussion. We are, the most conservative district in the country, but we like to have discussion on all sides of the issue. Will Marshal, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you. So first of all, tell us what Progressive Policy Institute is.
Sure. We're a think tank that's been in business for about 30 years in Washington, kind of center left. We earned our spurs working for Bill Clinton, really, back when he was rising up and throughout his two terms as president. So,
I hear a little bit of a Southern accent there.
Yes, ma'am. That's true. I'm from Tidewater, Virginia, the Chesapeake Bay area is where I come from.
So, what is post-populist economics?
Well, my point there is that since about 2010, with the Great Recession and the near meltdown of the financial system, there's been a kind of pall of pessimism that's been hanging over the whole political class, and everybody's kind of saying that the system is rigged and that workers have been victimized by this, that, and the other. And then there's some truth in these accounts. They're not all fiction. But 10 years, or now 13 years, is a long time to be in a state of clinical depression about the United States economy. The usual default setting for Americans is optimism, and I'm arguing that we ought to regain our sense of economic optimism and buoyancy and hope that our economy is doing well. The Economist magazine recently had a thing, it was kind of a panegyric to the American economy and how resilient it is. And to start emphasizing what new technologies and what innovation can bring us, and stop dwelling on victimhood and grievance. And so, I use the example on the Democratic side, and I think this is a bipartisan problem, not just a Democratic problem, but I use the example of this kind of attack on the tech companies, which seems to be failing and subsiding. Where we want to beat up on the private sector rather than extolling its creativity and ability to innovate and make our lives better.
It's funny because you said you started about 30 years ago, and I think we could all agree in this group. Think we could all agree that the term progressive means a different thing than it did 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And the term conservative and liberal do too. I mean, I talk about the inauguration speech of John Kennedy all the time because it's worn very well historically, even though he didn't have enough time to implement many of the things he talked about. But Bill Clinton was kind of a capitalist Democrat. Okay, so I'm going to give him that. But John Kennedy talked about strengthening our hemisphere, focusing more on being strong where we, basically in our own neighborhood first, and then going out through the rest of the world. And it's wearing very well. I mean, he certainly was, I think by today's standards, he would have been a conservative, but he was a conservative Democrat. There were a lot of the questions that we deal with today that weren't even on the radar then. So it's a little difficult to compare. But when you look at what he accomplished, and then what he couldn't accomplish, what he talked about, it was, he was right. He was right about the direction we should be going in.
Well, Jack Kennedy was a hero of mine. So I agree with you. But what he did was to look to the future with excitement, right? To challenge the country to beat the Russians in the space race, which we were behind in when he took office and which we surged ahead in over the 60s. And it's that spirit, and today I think we have an analog in this competition with China. I'm not saying a Cold War, but I'm saying a competition for economic and technological leadership in the world that President Biden's talked about. He's right about that. And I think I think we could win that competition, and we ought to be, driving all our policies through the prism of how we are successful in that competition. And it's forward-looking. It's not dwelling on on the failures of the past or the supposed failure of capitalism. It says, well, we got to reinvent the system and make it robust and dynamic again to keep this country moving forward.
And you're right about that. And to use an example, that I get frustrated about. And if this sounds partisan, I apologize, okay? But, we cannot change the past, okay? Rehash it. All you can do is learn from the past, right? So there's a lot of, flailing around about, racism and all of the things that have happened. And look, I lived through desegregation of high schools. I've lived through all of that stuff. I've worked against racism throughout my career and my life. All of that. So let's set that aside. Today, we have 21st century slavery in the human trafficking problem that's going on in America today, in the problem with child labor going on in America today. And while I'm not saying it's all President Biden's fault for his open border policy, but he's not helping the situation. And for a reasonable group of people, and I'm sure there's Democrats and Republicans. I had a panel of black pastors in here last week that were mostly Democrat that said we have to shut the border down because in our communities, meaning in their churches, they are seeing fentanyl overdoses, they are seeing sex trafficking and human trafficking, and they're seeing it in their community, and they say it needs to stop. So what I think is we're focusing so much on things we can't fix that we are missing the opportunities to really make a difference in the world.
Well, and I want to say in Biden's defense, he's actually doing a lot on the border, and there's a lot of propaganda to the contrary, but he, in his budget, he's got a proposal for $25 billion increase in border enforcement. I mean, big money, serious money. And he's now getting attacked by the left. They're accusing him of Trumpist policies, which is also not fair. But just because he's trying to cut down on the flow of illegal immigration into the country and to create better legal pathways for people, sort of say if you come in illegally, you go to the back of the line, and so don't do that.
I don't disagree with that in theory, but you can't deny by the Border Patrol's own numbers that 6.5 million people have come across the border in the last 3 years that they know about, okay, that have come across illegally. Okay, so the numbers just don't bear it out, okay? And I understand. I think they have this year, okay? Mm-hmm. But the first 2 years they didn't. And I think the two things, I just think it was a mistake. I know that they had this whole Trump is bad, so we have to reverse everything he did. But there were a couple of things he did really well, and they reversed it, like securing the border.
Well, what I'm saying is that he's taken a lot of incoming from the true the true people who are for open borders. He's not. He never has been. And we do want more. Democrats do want a lot more humane, less cruel policy, frankly, than the Trump policy. But Biden has taken steps, and he's getting a lot of blowback. So it would be good if some moderate Republican said, "Okay, this is encouraging. Let's work together to continue to move the dial in this direction."
I think
because
what's
he is
hard
not an
about
open
that,
border advocate.
I think, and Will, I got to be very honest with you, okay? The Joe Biden that I met in 2008 is not the Joe Biden that I see today, as far as the policies he's taking, as far as how he's approaching issues. I met and interviewed Joe Biden in 2008, and he was, and if you look at what he had to say over the years, I was hoping he was going to be the Alka-Seltzer for this kind of mess we were in, okay? I've been very disappointed, but the thing is, Will, and I know you live in Democratic circles, there's a lot of Democrats that are disappointed too.
Well, look, we represent what I'll call the pragmatic wing of the Democratic Party, not the left wing, and we're often in a state of, I wouldn't say conflict, but, competition for, leadership on policy and on politics. And what we focus on is the challenge of expanding the party coalition and winning back a lot of voters who have abandoned us, including working class voters that have gone over to the other side. And so I know the critiques, and I've dealt with them for decades, really, and they're not all wrong, but I'm just saying one has to be careful to differentiate Biden from one's view of other Democrats. And sometimes,
and I hear you, Will, about that 100%. And I tell you, I have loved this conversation, and more of us need to have these kinds of conversations. And I think that's what you're saying from what I've looked at from your group, that you want to have these kinds of conversations.
Well, we've always been able to have them with moderate Republicans. To be honest with you, there aren't enough of them around anymore.
Well, that's the way we feel about moderate Democrats.
At least not in Washington. Maybe they exist elsewhere, but they look like a vanishing species from this perspective. But we've had look, we want to get things done, get back to governing, and get back away from this negative partisanship, which really paralyzes government. I just got back from Australia. And they got a functioning democracy down there. They just do things better and differently and get things done. And that, we used to, and we got to get back to that.
Oh, I don't disagree with you about that. What we need to do, Will, is the next time, I'm actually taking a group of people to Washington, D.C. next spring to kind of see how things work. We should meet there and get some moderate Democrats and Republicans together and see what we can come up with.
Absolutely. We're game. Always game for that.
Sounds good. Will Marshal, thanks so much for being with us today. And tell people how they can get more information about your group.
Yeah, we're Progressive Policy Institute, PPIonline.org. You can get all the PPI, verse and scripture that you need. We welcome people to go there. But I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, Martha.
And we will talk again. Thank you so much, Will.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
We're going to continue our discussion about violence in America, how it relates to border security, how it relates to our cities. And joining me right now is Gabe Nadales. He's the national director of Our America, and he had a column last week in Newsweek, said punish criminals and support police to protect minority communities. Gabe, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
So tell folks a little bit about you first, because I think you have a very interesting story and how you got to the positions that you hold today.
Sure. I mean, I've been politically active since 2006 when I was in sixth grade. And back then I started off with just immigration things, myself being an immigrant. And there was a lot of chatter about immigration back in 2006 during the Bush era, pretty much. I started getting involved, and I was involved in a lot of liberal causes for several years. But in 2011, I started doing a little bit more radical activism, quote-unquote activism, when I was part of the Antifa movement. And, it's interesting because a lot of people, when I tell them, I used to be part of Antifa, people think I did it 2019, 2020. No, Antifa is a much, much older movement than people realize. But back in 2011, they were virtually unknown by most people. And, I did my thing. I can't really say much about that, except for the fact that I thought that I was fighting for something good, but I wasn't. And in 2012, I realized that I was wrong. And slowly and surely, I started reading more about conservative and libertarian principles, and I started changing my mind on a lot of these issues. And the great thing is that now I work for an organization that promotes American values called Our America. I want to, make sure that every person has the same equal opportunity that it was afforded to me as a person who came from virtually nothing.
So what do you think's different about you that you were able, because it sounds like maybe you heard these things in school, maybe you were taught these things in curriculum, and then you started to think how is this different? And I can relate to what you're saying. I'm a lot older than you are, but I was a Democrat until 1988, and then I caught a speech on C-SPAN by Newt Gingrich, and I was like, okay, this guy makes some sense. If I've been wrong about this, what else have I been wrong about? I started reading and discerning and critically thinking and doing all the things you're supposed to learn how to do. And I came to my conservative values because of that, and have been a conservative and working in conservative politics ever since. Sounds like you had a similar kind of thing where you were taught one thing, you picked up one thing, and then you started thinking, wait a minute, maybe I'm wrong about this.
I mean, exactly. But the one thing I would add, a little caveat to that, is the fact that it wasn't just one thing. You pick up a lot of different things from a lot of different places. As I mentioned, I started off doing some immigration, from activism from the liberal perspective. But then, say for example, in seventh grade, I had a teacher who was supposed to be teaching us biology, but who just take the opportunity to just decry God and anybody who thought that God existed was a stupid person. Of course, his children weren't stupid because they were atheists, or in ninth grade when, this is before critical race theory really made it in the really forceful, it started being recognized as critical race theory, but I remember reading about school shooters, and basically they were saying that school shooters were white, and this is in an English class in the 9th grade. A lot of different little things that I picked up. By the time I was part of the Antifa movement, I was already preconditioned to hate what I thought America stood for. And then the same thing applies to when I started becoming more on the liberty side, which is that I started reading about free market economists such as Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell. I mean, I would listen to some speeches by then presidential candidate Ron Paul, and then just like a little place from like everything. Not that I agree with everything that Milton or Thomas Sowell have to say, same with like Ron Paul, but it's just, you start creating your own identity, and I surely realized that the government gets in the way, and we shouldn't really rely on it for most things. We really have to rely on the individual to really do anything in society.
So let's fast forward to today in the column that you wrote, which I just thought was great because it pointed out this data that you need to know related to violent crime. So tell us about this column and then the message from this column.
Yeah, precisely. One of the things that was shocking, especially right now we're talking about the gun violence, but as the crime rate has gone up, that is impacting minority communities much worse than others. And I think there is a case to be made that if you want to reduce, if you want to give children, particularly children, we're talking about like actual children, not even like teenagers, just like children, a fighting shot at success. Well, they got to be alive. And you do that by protecting them. Now, reducing crime protects basically everybody, because everybody can be the victim of a crime. But when you have statistics that show you that they're affecting one group more than another, you really have to take pause and ask yourself, well, why is that? Well, one of the reasons why is because, unfortunately, within minority communities, it tends to be a higher crime rate. And not to speak anything that has to do with race, but more to do so with culture and as well as with the resources that, unfortunately, some of these communities get. We're looking at Detroit, we're looking at Baltimore, and at D.C., like some of these places where there is a lack of police officers. And it's sad because it's interesting. The data shows that if you add one police officer within a given jurisdiction, that reduces the crime rate by the homicide rate by 0.1 persons. That means that if you add 10 to 70 police officers within any police department, you are likely to reduce or to save one life. I mean, that's a pretty good statistic, but it's interesting because that's just having them be there in hotspots. When you actually adopt community policing, when you starting having a police officers engage with the community, solving low-level crime, then you have violent crime just overall significantly drop. And this benefits everybody, but especially we would see a drop in homicides for within the minority communities.
So you point out Pew Research Center, which can't be called a conservative organization. They say that violent crime disproportionately harms minority youth and that black victims accounted for 46% of all gun deaths among teens and children, and that 84% of gun deaths involving black children were homicides. And you go on to use the example of what recently happened in New York City, where there was a perpetrator that was arrested but not was released while they were awaiting trial, and that within 30 hours he had committed more crimes.
Yeah, and I mean, that just goes to show you how, like, the quote-unquote bail reform laws don't work. I mean, New York had this great idea that for certain crimes you weren't going to be able to hold the people with on bail. They were just going to be released back into society, and the judges couldn't do anything about it. They just had to release the suspects. And you had all of these other people who, as soon as they were released, they were committing crimes. I mean, one of the things that happened in California particularly was they were going to adopt a zero bail policy, which for certain crimes there was not going to be any bail required and people were going to be let go. But then it showed that those people who were released on zero bail, well, they were 3 times more likely to commit a violent crime upon being released. But the New York example, I think, is the most gruesome. He was released, and within 24 hours, he killed 2 people in 2 different independent homicides. I mean, you have to do something about this, and you have to hold violent people behind bars. You can't just let them go.
So I think what's really important about what you wrote is that you say in your final paragraph, it's essential to recognize that crime is a complex issue that requires a multifaceted approach. Some reforms may take months to implement, and it may take longer to see the fruits of those reforms. That's the most important line in this whole thing, because it's like we want this instant gratification, and I don't know, you're probably not old enough to remember when New York was a mess like this 40 years ago, and a mess like it is today. It's like we don't learn the lesson. And what happened was Mayor Giuliani came along and started community policing and getting police officers out of the cars and hiring more police officers. And in about a 10-year period, New York City went from a place you wouldn't go to a place where there were families with strollers in Times Square, with a chocolate shop and a Disney theater. Okay. I mean, it was a transformational change, but it took time for that to happen. And what you're saying is, in the short term, we need to keep violent criminals behind bars, increase police budgets, and hire more police officers, but it may take a long term to get the real results we want.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is it's typically it doesn't take long to see what happens when you go the opposite way. I mean, you had a lot of police departments slash their police budgets back in 2020 and 2021, and then you have in San Francisco the same public official who fought hard to slash the police budgets, begging for more police officers within her district. You have people saying oh snap, it took less than a year to really see the crime rate jump to this extreme.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate very much you being with us today. There are, so many things we could talk about. Tell us again, if people want to see more of what you're doing or find out more about your organization, how can they do that?
Sure. People can just check us out at joinouramerica.org. That's joinouramerica.org. Or they can follow me on Twitter at OG Nadales, OG-Nadales.
And that, Gabe Nadales, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Congressman Andrew Clyde with me today to talk about these really important issues. Andrew, thanks so much for being with me today.
Well, good morning, Martha. Always good to be with you.
So let's talk about the debt ceiling first before we get to the border, because there's so much to talk about on both of these issues. The Congress did what Democrats didn't think they could do. They were able to cobble together their coalition, their caucus, and get a debt limit deal passed. For months, the Schumer and the president have been saying, show us your plan. You showed them the plan, and now they don't know what to do.
Well, you're exactly correct. They were expecting that we would not be able to do anything, and they would push us to the very end, and then they would get they call it a clean, I called it a blind debt ceiling increase, because this is truly blind when all you do is increase a debt and continue to do that year after year after year. You have no idea where you're taking the country other than into financial ruin. But,
Andrew, by the way, we have never done just a clean debt ceiling increase. We've never done that. It's always had other things. And even Patricia Murphy wrote in her column today that you cannot just raise the debt and then have the spending continuing to be barreling down the pike that's in there. What is in your deal that you passed makes a lot of sense. You get rid of COVID money that you haven't spent yet. Hey, I would say we need to do that up and down the government. We need to go through every department, and money that's been allocated but not spent needs to come out of the budget.
Oh, that's exactly what we did on this particular debt ceiling. We responsibly addressed the debt ceiling here, Martha. I mean, when you look at the COVID money that has been stripped out of it, when you look at the fact that the $71 billion has been retracted from the 87,000 IRS agents, so that won't happen. When you look at $465 billion, when we killed the student loan program, I mean, these things are genuine, real cuts to future spending, and that's exactly what we need to do to put this country back on a path toward a balanced budget. And that's the whole focus of this. Responsibly spending taxpayer dollars, not irresponsibly.
Now, I understand there will be a meeting. I believe the date is May the 9th. An emergency in Washington always takes a week, I guess, is what it is. So they're going to be meeting. I got to tell you, I'm surprised because I was not the biggest Kevin McCarthy fan, as you knew. I was concerned about a California Republican leading us, but I think he did an amazing job in negotiating within the caucus. He had a very tight majority. He had to deal with a lot of different kind of Republicans, and he was able to get this deal through, which I think represents not just right-wing issues, which I don't even know what right-wing is. You hear that term thrown around, but it's a fiscally conservative package that does increase the debt. It serves both of the purposes.
Well, this all goes back to the speaker fight in January when, we came to an agreement with Kevin McCarthy on specific financial principles, and this is part of that. He's holding to his agreement, and I love that. I love to see an empowered speaker and one who is showing financial responsibility. I mean, two things that he has said for the last 2 years since I've been there is that our greatest external threat is China. Our greatest internal threat is an wildly increasing debt. Yep. And so we're like, okay, let's address that debt. And that's what we're doing with this bill, with the Limit, Save, Grow Act.
So tell us, do you think, I think it's going to pass ultimately. I think they'll be hand-wringing until about the 20th of May, and then the Democrats are going to want to go home for Memorial Day, and they'll get something passed. That's what I think is going to happen.
This is the only plan that's out there. The Democrats don't have a plan. The president doesn't have a plan. The Senate doesn't have one. This is the right plan. The Senate Republicans are all supporting this plan as well. So I think this is the plan we need to go with, because it is responsibly addressing the debt ceiling, and it is cutting woke, weaponized, and wasteful spending out of our government. And that's where we need to go with this.
So the other huge issue, I had a couple of pastors in here last week that said every week in their congregations they are dealing with having to drug overdoses, problems related to people coming across the border in their communities right here in North Georgia. And we've got major issues with what's happening with the border. We've got a press secretary that got in front of the press corps and said that illegal immigration is down 90%. I don't know where she got that number. And when she got challenged on it yesterday, she said people were being dramatic. And bottom line is, according to the Border Patrol, 6.5 million people have come across in the last 3 years. That is unsustainable. What's going to happen at the border?
Well, what Jean Pierre said was a shameless lie. And this administration is simply delusional to think that illegal immigration is down 90%. No, they have a new program. It's basically they're creating amnesty, and it's called, it's a program, a parole program. And that's just simply unacceptable and inexcusable. It does a disservice to American citizens to literally bring illegals across and say, oh, there's no illegal immigration anymore. We're just paroling everybody instead. You see drug overdoses dramatically increasing, and the worst of it is fentanyl. You had 1,400 pounds of fentanyl coming across. An increase of 25% this month or March from February. And if you see how many people drug overdoses is killing every solitary year, it's incredible. 107,000 in 2021. This is a national crisis, and the Biden administration is turning a blind eye to it.
Well, and bottom line is, to your point about the debt, and China. China makes the parts that go into making the fentanyl. They get it to Mexico, and the cartels use it to make the fentanyl. So we've got to shut this border down, and then we have got to figure out how we're going to deal with all the people that are already here. It is a huge problem, and nobody, the Republicans want to work on it, but nobody else does.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And this month, we are going to address that with H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023. And we're going to force President Biden to restart the border wall. We're going to end catch and release. We're going to end his abuse of executive authority on immigration. And, we're going to increase support for the border. And these are just things that are common sense issues to deal with the crisis at the southern border. I mean, this is unsustainable. Like you said, the number of children that are coming across the southern border, the unaccompanied alien children is dramatically increasing. The amount of fentanyl this year is going to be twice literally what we were last year. And it's putting this nation in danger, tremendous danger. And that message has to be communicated to the American people. And the lies that the Biden administration is putting out through the press secretary is inexcusable. And honestly, it's a tremendous disservice to the American people.
Congressman Clyde, if people need to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
They can go to our website at clyde.house.gov, and they can sign up for our newsletter, which is a great way to follow what we're doing every week. And then also you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter and on Getter at Rep. Clyde. So, Martha, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the folks of the night.
And I want to have you back on when you have a little bit more time, because we need to have an in-depth discussion about guns, because we're getting a lot of questions from listeners, and there's nobody, I think, in the Congress that understands more of the ins and outs of the laws related to it than you do. So when you get some time where you can spend 30 minutes with us, we'd like to I really want to get this discussion going.
Sure, that'd be great. I've got a bill that's going to come up, I think, the 23rd of May, and that bill is going to eliminate the ATF's rule on the pistol brace. So that's coming to the House floor. It'll be my third bill that has come to the House floor this year, and looking forward to another passage of a strong bill that defends our liberty.
Absolutely. Andrew Clyde, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Martha.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.